May you always rest in paradise where there is no pain or suffering. I will always see your face in my mind, hoping that I made you proud. Your prodigal son. Hashtag Hoya for life. And let's not forget, in Allen Iverson's Hall of Fame speech, he also mentioned crediting John Thompson for saving his life. Joining us now, college basketball analyst Jay Bilas. Jay, great to have you with us this morning. What was your reaction to this unfortunate news?
Well, Molly, great sadness. John Thompson was not only a great basketball coach, but he was a great man, a man of principle and courage, one that would step forward whenever it was necessary to speak out on important issues and to educate his players on those important issues. You know, he used to have a deflated basketball in his office that said to his players, what will you do when the air goes out of the ball? And I think his players knew that he was there to protect them, and that was a big part of Hoya paranoia, frankly, was for the attention to be taken, the negative attention to be taken by Coach Thompson, and to shield his players so that they could pursue their educations and just play. And I don't think I'll ever forget when he walked out of a Big East game before tip in protest of Proposition 42, which he and others felt was disproportionately affecting African-American athletes. And it was, frankly, what I would say a racist policy of the NCAA. You know, during my lifetime, I mean, in the 60s, I was born in 1963. Until I was 5 years old, there were no white players in the SEC or the ACC. And oddly enough, a lot of these sort of restrictions, these eligibility rules, came in when the game was first integrated. And so it doesn't take a genius to figure out what those rules were aimed at. And John Thompson knew it and fought against it.
Jay, always appreciate seeing you, buddy. Thank you for being on the show. Obviously, you were right about Prop 42 and what have you, and that's definitely something that resonates with all of us, but also what resonated with me when you talked about being protective of his players. Let's harken back to 1995, and there's a game that they're about to take place. I believe it was against Villanova, if I remember correctly. And they had signs in the stands against for Georgetown. Georgetown was playing Villanova, and obviously Allen Iverson was going to be on the court. He was in the arena, even though he had a jacked up ankle at that particular moment in time. And we all know the Allen Iverson story, the bowling alley brawl, and ultimately he was convicted with an excessive sentence before being granted clemency by Governor Douglas Wilder at the time, who was an African-American governor for Virginia. In his last day in office, I believe he did that, and Allen Iverson ultimately would end up landing at Georgetown and playing for John Thompson. And they had signs in the stands, and it said the next Jordan, but they cut out the word Jordan and called Allen Iverson the next OJ, and as in OJ Simpson. And we all know that story. And as a result of that, John Thompson talked about how his team would get off the court. They will walk off the court for a nationally televised game right now unless those signs were removed from those stands against his player. And even though he knew that his players were subjected to criticism and all of that stuff, he also understood when a line was being crossed and when society as a whole couldn't okay this or couldn't turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to something and couldn't tolerate certain things. He knew what that line was, and he knew when something needed to be done. And that's one of the things that definitely resonated with me very, very profoundly. I was working for the Philadelphia Inquirer at the time that transpired. So to see that up close and personal definitely really resonated with me as well. And that's long after John Thompson had already established himself as such an iconic figure, specifically for African Americans throughout this nation because of the battles that he was fighting on our behalf, particularly that of young black men. And so I'm very grateful, very thankful for the relationship that I had with him. Thankful that he always took it upon himself to counsel me at every turn. I'm going to miss him tremendously. And as I said earlier, my heart goes out to his sons, John Thompson III and Ronnie Thompson, who I know personally, and of course his wonderful daughter Tiffany as well. It's just a really, really sad day, Max.
If anything if the last 4 years have taught me anything, is we're certainly not as close to living in a post-racial world as I would have hoped. But the truth of it is, for me, is my childhood, and maybe I think of it this way because we remember fondly as the glory days when we were kids following sports. But I always just thought of John Thompson as one of these larger-than-life titans of the sports world when I was growing up. You know, Georgetown and the kind of racial component's undeniable. But as just a Big East fan and rooting for St. John stuff, I didn't, like, from what I was saying, I didn't think of it that way. I just thought of him as one of the giants of the sports world back then. And if you look at like his ongoing legacy, his son takes over, has a lot of success. His great star player from the championship team, and I think like the most fearsome Georgetown teams, is head coach. Like it's still being felt. He was like Godfather emeritus down there, and maybe it's again because I'm getting older. But college ball doesn't feel the same to me, Jay, because you don't have even 97% is remarkable, period. But back then, it was more understandable. More kids stayed for all 4 years. And nowadays, the real talents, they come and they go, and you're just getting to know them, and they're already in the pros. But back then, college basketball, and especially Big East basketball, was a real thing. And he was one of the giants. And as always, when someone like that passes, it's a demarcation of time for many people in the generation who grew up watching him, and it certainly feels that way to me today.